I'm not a big dresser upper. It's and well, I go into it in some length in the book, but no, I'm one of those people who likes to remind ourselves that below the waist, I could be wearing nothing, or I could be wearing my pajamas, or I could be, dressed up in nice chinos or something, and it gets to be a mystery.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually like that about Zoom. There's something that's kind of like, I used to get really nervous before presenting. I always did a good job, but I would get nervous, like, and I feel like, not that I don't get nervous on Zoom. I mean, I definitely, feel it, but there's something about it that's also softer or something. I don't know. And maybe it's the fact that most people are in their pajamas, or with their screens up.
There was the discussion about the Zoom shirt. If you were going to an office, you had to at least dress up in your Zoom shirt.
Right. And then you could have your slippers on or your pajamas.
Yeah, exactly. But you, I can tell, have shoes on. You have some serious shoes on.
Well, I have my sneakers on actually, but they're
really?
They're pink and red. Yeah.
I thought I heard you clomping around. Are they clomping sneakers?
No, they're not clomping at all. They're sneakers.
Okay.
I was just being heavy-footed, I suppose.
All right.
Do we let people in?
Yeah. I'll let these people in, and Ashley Craig, Julie Vandenover, Sharon Allard. I'll just let them in.
Great.
So you see that they're there as well.
I do. Yeah.
Okay. Well, welcome, people. Jen Shaw. Cig, this is going to be fun.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Let's see.
Hi, Jen. How are you?
I think everyone is muted on the way in, but I can take them all off, at least for now. Or should I just leave them on mute?
Yeah, and then if someone wants to come off it, then they can. Hi, Julia.
Hi, Cig. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to see you. How's everything?
Nice to see you. How was your summer?
Good. I mean, it just started. The weather's been it's been shitty weather this year. So it's boiling today though. So it has not, but it's been a really foggy, rainy summer. So we do but I feel like we're campaigning that September is now going to be considered summer. How about you?
Well, ours is over. Kids are back in school here, so.
It's too early. I hate hearing that about August.
I know. I'm a quarter way used to it. It definitely doesn't feel normal, but I have to say, after having the kids at home for 18 months of remote learning, I'm super grateful to have them back in school full time. Fingers crossed that it continues in that manner, but I guess, it's just, I don't know. You never know what happens these days.
Yeah, no, I know. Fingers crossed. Exactly.
Crazy times.
Yeah, for sure.
Hi, Ashley. How are you? Dawn. Hi, Mara.
Hey, Julia.
Hi, Ashley.
I miss you.
Many people showing up. This is great. And you all know each other, so you all can go talk on the side.
Ashley, where are you?
I'm in Boston.
That's right. I forget you're there.
Yeah.
Is it 1,000 degrees there right now?
It's about 96, 97. It's hot.
Wow, it's hot here too, but it's not that hot. It's crazy.
Yeah.
All right.
I've got a couple more people coming in here, so we'll just hitting the hour, as we say.
Mhm.
All right. As soon as it turns 5:01 Minnesota time, there it is, 5:01. All right, Cig, are we ready? Are you ready?
We're ready. I love your promptness. Beautiful. It's like very British.
Well, you know, if I have to admit some sort of historical lineage, I think it's all, I feel like I'm kind of British mutt, you know.
Everyone in Britain is, unless you're aristocracy, you're like a scullery maid. You know what I mean? That's how, that's, you know, genealogy.
Right, right. Goodness, there are all kinds of people coming in. I'll just try and keep an eye on that as I introduce myself. I'm George Slade. Welcome to the August installment of Photobook Banter. I'm a writer and photographer based in Minneapolis, and I say that in that order. And I am so happy to be sitting here with the ravishingly outfitted photographer and writer, Cig Harvey, from the great state of Maine. You're in the Rockport area, right?
That's correct. Yeah, Midcoast,
Right.
Maine.
Right. In the neighborhood of what used to be known decades ago as the Maine Photographic Workshop. Now it has segued into Maine Media, I think. Is that right?
And college. Can't remember. You can't forget the and college at the end.
Oh,
then,
my goodness.
Right. That's right. And that's where I know many people who are coming onto the Zoom, and it's great to see so many familiar faces. So thanks for joining, everyone. It's great to be here.
Yes, thank you all for taking part. Let's see. Well, Cig, just because you are so red today, and
Yeah.
and you are sitting in such a red place.
Yep.
I wanted to throw a comment at you about that one of your own comments, actually, from an interview you did not too long ago, sometime during COVID, when everyone was not really accustomed to being in a shared space together. But it was a discussion on beauty that you did with Donna McNeil, and at the Ellis Beauregard Foundation. Anyway, you said, after much discussion with Donna, you said, well, I look back to my childhood and it was all about color. And I just thought that was an astonishing way to describe one's childhood. And I just thought, well, Cig, maybe you can take that idea and run with it a little bit while we're sitting here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it goes back to this idea that of nature versus nurture, and just sort of who we really are fundamentally. And it's the same with our, you know, each of us on this Zoom, our projects, you know, and we each have these projects inside of us. And, you know, I just remember very clearly as a child that, you know, color really influenced everything I did, and, you know, surrounded my memories. It influenced how I worked. It influenced, you know, how I spent my days. So, you know, and I was lucky enough that I had parents that sort of got out of the way of me and just let me sort of be that person. And so it's an idea and a thought that I really try and practice with Scout, of just trying to pay attention with what she's naturally drawn to, what she naturally loves to do, and then, you know, help facilitate that way, rather than trying to sort of always present, you know, new ideas for her, things to do after school. Let her direct it, you know. So
and Scout, for those of us who don't know necessarily, is your daughter, correct?
Right. That's correct. She's 10 now, and she's actually with her grandmother, although she probably would have made a visit. But we've got Granny coming for the first time for 2 years as well. So they're down at the beach. So,
Oh, nice.
But
Well,
I definitely think she has that relationship to color too, and just, you know, so thinking about, for each of us in this room here, in this collective room, like, what are the things that we change much less than we think we do, and what were the things that you were fascinated, absorbed with, drawn to when you were a kid? And I bet they relate somehow now to who you are sitting in the room, you know?
Well, and I'm interested in knowing a little bit about where you were that was such a colorful place, or was it that colorful when you were growing up? Was it a place that now seems extremely colorful, or?
No, I mean, I think it was more the idea of, that's what I gravitated towards. I grew up in the country, that's true, and, you know, nature. And I remember, you know, having a tree house in an apple blossom tree, which is where my heart is now too. And, you know, being really affected by nature and the color in nature and drawn to certain colors. So I don't think it was, I grew up particularly I mean, I grew up in a beautiful area in England. So, but I think that was just something I really focused on, I think.
Well, again, you look ravishing. I want to say that because of the review that I wrote of Blue Violet. It struck me that there was all sorts of rav words, and there was ravishing, and there was ravenous, and ravenous goes along with your interest in eating flowers. At what point did you start being interested in that part of the process? You know, consuming your subjects, as it were.
Yeah, I loved how you wrote that about consuming subjects. But I think that for the last 20, 25 years, I've been really drawn to making work about the senses. I just couldn't articulate that's what I was doing. And I think that's the same for so many of us, where we're sort of making our work, we're paying attention to it, but it's always sort of a little bit elusive to name it. You know, it comes from this place in the gut, or to describe it, which is why we're normally always so bad at artist project statements as a group. So, you know, it was only when I did the Ogunquit show, or preparing for the Ogunquit show in 2019, that I really felt, going through all of the years of my work, that was a thread that connected everything. That this sort of synesthesia, the mixing up of senses, was really what connected, you know, the 3 books that had come before that time, and really work right back into the 90s. And that's a really sort of beautiful assignment that would sort of task you all, this idea of trying to figure out, going back to that childhood thing, what are the things, what are the projects, some projects seem so different from each other, but they often have a thread that's connected. And the sensory experience and the mixing up of the senses was something that really united that work. And then I thought, well, how would it be to actually really make a body of work where that was the main umbrella, to sort of give it conscious thought and conscious mind, rather than just following intuition. But I do believe that intuition as a creative act is really important. But then sort of putting that sort of intellect and the mind to it afterwards. So that's when I started sort of eating flowers came about. And, you know, and then with my friend Mary, who was, you know, sick at the time, and, you know, not allowed for, you know, health reasons, not allowed fruits and vegetables, not allowed, you know, all the surfaces had to be metal and clean, and just for sterile reasons, that her senses were then sort of taken away from her in many ways, other than sound, which is obviously the most medically sterile. So sound was something she could have in abundance, but taste and all these things we sort of take for granted in our sort of daily lives if we're healthy. It's really
COVID has stolen certain senses from certain people, and it's a horrible situation.
Right, the sense of touch, obviously, you know, for many people went for a long time without touching anyone, you know.
Mm.
And then obviously medically, the sense of smell and taste, which, you know, can cause, it sounds sort of frivolous, but I think it causes, you know, a lot of depression. It's when you lose a sense, I think it's a weighty thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, your body loses one of the things it relies on to get through the day.
Yeah, and to feel bliss and to feel enjoyment, yet warn us of danger. I mean, there's so many layers to it. You know, but that is something that I found as a central theme throughout my work that sort of became highlighted in the last probably 3 years.
Well, we have a whole bunch of selections from your work, kind of a chronological survey, and I'm going to do the best I can to pull that up right now, and we can share it with and talk our way through some of those things.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to put any questions in the chat, I mean, we're here just to, you know, so anything anyone wants to know, I'm a wide open book, and happy to share. Or you can just ask them.
Or you can just ask.
Yeah.
Even in this moment while I'm trying to figure something out here.
So we don't make George sweat.
Right. Well, I'm already sweating. I'm not a great technological person. I'm just going quickly back through time here.
Yeah. It's my
so
life.
everyone can know where we're going to be ending up. So the first work of yours that I knew was work that was leading up to the publication of this book.
Yeah.
And I found myself wondering at a certain point in time when I heard that you were producing a book. First of all, I could not understand the title for the life of me. And the second thing was that, you know, I had seen your photographs and knew them relatively well. And they're wonderful sort of, you know, self-contained moments. And I found myself thinking, how is this going to translate into a book? And, you know, you told me that you were working on it for 10 years, something thereabouts.
Yeah.
At what point did you know it was going to end up in a book called You Look at Me Like an Emergency?
Well, when I set out to make what ended up being in this book, that wasn't my intention, although quite quickly I realized that I wanted to make a book. I think all of us want to make a book. I mean, a book is like, I always say, ISBN number is forever. And, you know, I think there's a real unique connection with photography and books. It's sort of like it's like theater and the stage, you know, it lends itself to the medium. So I think for most photographers, I think it's a goal to have a book. And while I didn't necessarily set out to make this book, and I haven't set out to make any of my books, I make my work, and then and I look at what I've made, and it becomes a book, or it becomes a discrete project. So, you know, it took my first book, it took a number of years to find a publisher. You know, initially, but also the writing part of it. I'd always written, and I wrote in these, you know, journal-esque type. It wasn't really a journal. It was more, you know, writing down my observations, things that I was proud of, things that I was like, I had seen that day that I needed to be appreciated.
Can you hold that up a little closer to your camera?
Yeah. So, and this very much sort of looks like what the work looks like on the wall now, where it's sort of a photograph and text mixed together. Obviously less text when it's on the wall, but this is a similar way that I would show work. It grew out of these journals. And as I was telling you earlier, you know, when I was first putting together You Look at Me Like an Emergency as a book, I, you know, had a stack of prints and a stack of texts, and sort of made this jigsaw puzzle of trying to get them all together. And some days it felt impossible, and other days it felt like, yes, I have a book. And then the next day it felt like I had nothing. And then I made a few blurb books, and they were like, as I've said a few times, they were a complete thud. They would come through the door, and I would get them, and it would be like $180 later, and just, you know, and it just looked terrible. There was not, because I wasn't in the business of book design, which is its own important skill set. So it was really working with a designer, with Deb Wood, who I worked with her on 3 books. She's an extraordinary designer, that sort of took the same content of what was in a blurb book, and then she designed on it, and she wrote on the photographs. And if we move through some of these, George, I think we'll see that she wrote, with her handwriting on some of the photographs. She because it's not, it wasn't the prints, right? It wasn't on the wall. There was something, that could be very irreverent about them. And I think that was very exciting to me. I've also have a deep love of Japanese photo books, and have done for years and years. And, they are so free with their book design. So instead of it being traditional American photo book would have, blank left hand, white page, the image on the right hand side of the page, or typically a border, everything would be codex, which means, the spine would be on the left hand side, and what was so wonderful about sort of Japanese photo history in terms of books was that they would crop the image, full bleed, it would, they would invert it, they would write on them. It's just such sort of irreverence for it in many ways, which I think was really exciting. But it took working with a designer to sort of, for me to realize that. And to, you only know what you know, right? I didn't know, even though I spent all my money on photo books, I didn't really sort of study them until the early 2000s.
And there was a point at which your work suddenly wanted to become a book.
Yeah. Oh, I desperately wanted a book. I mean, I wanted a book so badly. And that to me, I still think of my work, and I'm working on my new book right now. I'm always working on a book. That to me makes sense of a way to sort of to figure out where to put it, sort of the perfect place, the perfect home for, words and images.
In roughly 1970, I trace a lot of photo books, a lot of really important photo books for me to 1970, which includes Danny Seymour's A Loud Song, Robert Frank's Lines of My Hand, and the books that really they had a strong sense of being handmade, and of definitely breaking down the notion of the purity of the photographs. Where you can write on the photograph, you can write next to the photograph. I mean, I think you've found a really lyrical style, a style that isn't necessarily first person, but it involves some clear, I guess, biographical references from time to time.
Yeah, I mean, my work is very much autobiographical, whether it's, this early work from the 2000s, late 90s, a lot of self-portraits. I mean, I haven't made a self-portrait in, I don't know, it's probably 16 years, but my work is still just as Blue Violet is autobiographical, even though I'm not physically in it. So that to me makes sense of a way of sort of living, a way of sort of organizing my work. And I mean, in many ways, I would argue that all work is, autobiographical, even if it's documentary. There's a reason why you're drawn to that group of people. There's a reason why you're drawn to that river. It's just how far removed you are in terms of how obvious is it, in terms of, and I think that's a wonderful thing. I think that's what, it's deciding what you care about in the world. How do you want to spend your time, on this planet? What do you want to write about? What do you want to make pictures of? So those were some thoughts. And just to sort of, I just saw this question pop up, George, so I might just answer it right here.
Oh, sure.
Someone asked me about the tools of the trade, camera, medium format, same lenses. And I really want to say that I have used everything. And I sort of love that. I've had my Hasselblad stage, which is where a lot of the pictures from Emergency, and then when I moved to digital, Canon, Sony, right now I'm shooting with a Leica Q, Fuji for sure, Pentax. I mean, and I sort of love that I am not tied to any one thing. And, I typically work with one camera, one lens, and just like until I break it. And then I decide, well, what do I want to try now? And
seriously, until you break it?
Until I break it. I bought the same camera twice. And then the second time I broke it, the second one, I moved to a different one, but that's the only time I've used the same camera.
Well, you have a slight predilection for the square, it seems to me.
Yeah, my new work though, the last 3 years I've been working in the rectangle, and I sort of miss, I'm dyslexic with numbers. And so I really wish I was still shooting square, because then it's so much easier. We're dealing with ratios, but in terms of framing, and 16:20 is not the same ratio as 30:40 and all that stuff.
Right.
But that's just purely my lack of interest in math that takes over there.
Well,
I do love the square.
And the first 3 books were all close to square in their trim size, weren't they?
They were square, yeah.
Yeah.
Square, yeah. Yeah.
And here's the next one, gardening, and gardening at night. Now, this one, the title is fairly descriptive. I mean, I think that there is within the book a lot of gardening at night, whether it's actual gardening or metaphoric gardening. Is that your handwriting on the cover, or is that your designer?
Yeah, that's the designer. I do my own handwriting now. That was something I decided with, a few years ago that was important to me, and that's something that I've, still learning. And, the same with the illustrations in Blue Violet, they were all mine. Originally, I was going to hire an illustration artist to do it, but it felt like it needed to be my hand, and that the audience would forgive me for not being a great illustrator, but that it was important that it, was my hand.
Right.
So with Emergency, it was all hand lettered. With gardening, and the title came from sort of these beetles that would attack the garden at night, and then it became this metaphor for sort of becoming a mother and protecting. Emergency I think of as being this sort of search for finding a space in the world that felt like home. Gardening was like, finding the home, getting married, having a child, what that meant, owning property for the first time, and being connected to a land. And then Orchestra was very much about sort of the fragility of life and how all of that can be gone in an instant. And so that's the sort of the thread that connects the 3 books together. So gardening was some type, a lot of hand, and with occasional hand lettering, and then Orchestra was all type, and so was Blue Violet. Yeah.
Oh, I love this. Tell me a little bit about the language of flowers that's implied in this.
Well, this is more of a literal, in terms of, I actually think moving forward, garden design is in my future of just trying to sort of create spaces of wonder, and I think that flowers, and how we can sort of, if you have the land, I love that there's something so optimistic about a seed, and it still baffles me that seeds grow, and sort of, I'm a new gardener in the sense of, the last sort of 10 years, but this idea of, planting something in February, but when it feels like nothing will live in Maine, planting something inside and growing something inside and then transferring out, and then it turning into this riotous thing that is beautiful, that hits on all the senses, like a sound garden, it tastes great, you can eat it too. I mean, it's just like this layering of senses. And I love that it came from this tiny seed. You made something out of nothing. And I often think of photography about that, and photo books. You're making something out of nothing, and then out of something that you care about, that was a seed, and then you made its physical objects. Like, we deal a lot with screens these days, but I love the fact that it's a print, or it's a book, it's a physical object that gets touched and is 3D, and a garden is the same way. It comes from nothing.
Do flowers taste of their colors, or?
But that's an interesting question. No, typically, I mean, so here are some flower facts that, I've learned along the way. If a flower doesn't smell, it typically doesn't taste. So dahlias, they're these supermodels in the way they sort of tend to put all their eggs into one of the senses. So dahlias are all about visual. Whereas zinnias are so beautiful, but they have no smell, therefore no taste. So, it's not necessarily to do with the color of how they taste. It's, just the family that they're from. So they, a lot of them have like borage is slightly cucumbery, and nasturtiums, you know, have a peppery taste to them.
Mm-hmm. But are there, I mean, I'm linking different parts of synesthesia.
Yeah.
You know, if a flower tastes, does its taste have a color that is similar to the flower?
I see what you're saying. You know, I think that, you know, I don't really have synesthesia. I have a tiny bit of it. My daughter has it much more than I do. I mean, I wrote about that in Blue Violet. It's something that I'm really connected to. But I know that flavor, when we taste something, it's not, we think of, you know, if we did a pie chart, I actually had this in the book and take it out. If you had a pie chart, you would think flavor is all about taste. So it would be 100% taste. It's actually, you know, it's a large portion is taste, but the visual side of flavor is really important. If something looks terrible, you know, looks like, you know, something that isn't edible, then it's going to affect how you feel the taste of it is.
I remember something about that from reading as a child, a picture of a white Oreo.
Yeah.
You know, and that your immediate reaction is to say, no, that can't taste like, you know, there's something wrong with this.
There's something wrong with it. Yeah. And it's also, and then, you know, also texture. If something is slimy, that really will affect its flavor. And also the sort of satisfaction of hearing something crunch, if that's why we love chips. It hits all those things. So, you know, it does, we are all dealing with mixing up of the senses. You don't have to be someone with synesthesia to have these daily experiences, you know, that's part of just being human.
Well, it's a full immersion. I mean, all of our senses are working all the time, right?
Yeah, exactly. And as a reflex often without us paying them any attention. So that's something that I love to do, is to think about, well, you know, what is happening with our bodies that we have no control over, right?
I love this about the army of happiness.
Yeah. It's
and then a child being an army of one.
Yes.
You are a very good writer, Cig.
Oh, thanks, George. I mean, I really appreciate that. It's like the highest compliment and praise, you know, coming from you. And, you know, I'm not known for my writing. I'm known for my pictures, but for me, it's just as important. And I spend just as much time writing as I do, you know, making pictures.
Well, you told me about an incredible honor. I don't know if you can talk about the PEN Award.
Well, they just asked me to apply for the PEN Award, which is the Poet, Essayist, Novelist of America. It doesn't mean anything, you know, it just asked me to apply. But I felt like I had, like, you know, won the Olympics just to, you know, just be asked that. It was a great honor, you know, to have even been, I didn't realize that sort of anyone in that world was even sort of reading what I was making. My audience has always been more visual art, you know, and I've always, you know, I've always really struggled and pushed with how to make the words more visual. You know, I use neon. I've been working with neon for 10 years. I've embroidered text. That's where, you know, I guess my being drawn to hand lettering comes in. Like, I'm always trying to find a way to how to make type and text more visual. Yeah. Somebody's asking me about my creative mind mapping process. And that, to me, is, you know, it's a way of getting out everything that's in my body, in my head, in my gut, in my heart, and putting it onto one piece of paper. And then it becomes this sort of visual map. I think all photographers love maps. And I was going to talk about this earlier, George, when you were talking about emergency, this idea of, you know, books and when did it become a book? And I think, you know, for the last 20 years, I've taught bookbinding, and I know some of the people here in the Zoom room, you know, have taken classes with me. And I think even if you never make a handmade book after the fact, I think everyone who's interested in publishing a book, even if it's a trade book, you know, where you don't do the design, you don't do the sort of physical stitching, there's something about that act of considering every element of the book form, the size of the page, the type of the paper, the color of the thread that you sew it together, how you sew it together. Is it glued on? Is it tipped in? Does it have a cover? There's something about that sort of endless discovery and questions and decision-making you have to make with artist books that I think really ties into a creative process, but also, you know, then helps define the type of book you want to make. So I recommend that everyone take, you know, an artist book class just to sort of begin that process.
Well, here's the big question for you. Do you put an ISBN on your artist books?
No. Can you even do that? I don't even know if you can do that. Is that a thing?
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I'm really interested in is, you know, who do we make these books for? And are they meant for, you know, 6 people to really enjoy and covet, you know, and love the material quality of? Or are they for, I mean, I guess they could be either or both. I mean, are they for a broad audience and we want people to know something about the book, so we create an ISBN and we send it to libraries?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's all of the above, right? And it's different audience. And that's the beautiful thing that with photography, that it is a reproducible medium. You know, painters don't have this same relationship with books that we do as photographers and writers. They just don't, you know, or if they do, it's sort of it's a greatest hits. It's like an art book of paintings. It's sort of not a book in itself. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
A start and an end and a narrative. Typically it's not. Of course, there are, you know, examples that contradict that. But, you know, I think that idea of making artist books that have a smaller audience, that maybe have original prints, is a wonderful, I mean, I'm making one right now it's called Eat Flowers. And it's original prints, and there'll be 40 copies. I'm doing it with Two Ponds Press, and it's a very different experience than Blue Violet, which is a much wider audience, but the prints aren't going to be the same as when it's offset printed, you know. I mean, it's 2 different audiences, and I love that books can be both of those things, you know.
Well, you know, for those of us who are real book nerds, if you look at colophons, and you look at a colophon of a book like one of Lee Friedlander's books, for instance, you can see 3 different ISBNs.
Oh, wow.
You see one for the trade edition, one for a special edition, and one for the museum edition. You know, and each one of those are escalating degrees of fanciness, articulation, enhancement.
Yeah. Yeah, and so, you know, there's also a different price point and a different, you know, there's something so wonderful about trade books is that they are very democratic. It's a way, you know, I mean, it's a way of owning, you know, an artist's work that isn't, you know, a print and a limited edition print on the wall. But I love that, you know, I think everyone on this Zoom is a book nerd. I think that's how we're a collective book of, you know, book nerds. And I love that.
I hope so.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I was just thinking today when I was trying to find a book, I was missing Tim Whalen's bookstore in Rockport so much, where I used to go. And I also missed this in COVID. And I bet many of you felt this way, where, you know, I miss just going to a bookstore and not knowing what I would find. It's not the same on, you know, for me, I'm not really an internet shopper. I don't get the same joy. I like to touch and smell, you know, who doesn't love to smell a book? And, you know, to find something that you didn't know about before you walked in there. I miss that experience of bookstores.
Well, and for me, the idea of going to a bookstore was like the place I felt least safe about, because in bookstores, people are lingering in one place. So air isn't circulating, you know, people are touching all kinds of things.
Yes, a bunch of touching, lingering, breathing things.
I mean, it was just the place I most wanted and least wanted to go.
That's a really good point, but I missed it. I really missed, I missed being around bookstores and just the sense of discovery, you know, like going into the great photo bookstores, you know, you're going to come out 4 hours later, having spent too much money, but just like look on your face. Like I love going to Printed Matter in New York, or Dashwood Books, or Arcana Books in LA. You know, I mean, I always carve out, whenever I go to a city, I carve out a portion of time to go to a bookstore, and time disappears, doesn't it? It doesn't, it goes by, you know?
I remember discovering a bookstore, I think it was in Helsinki, called The Magic Lantern.
Oh, great.
And I went into that place and I completely lost track of time. Yeah. It was, I mean, it was books I'd never even heard of, you know, because they were from a different country, a different part of the world, you know. Yeah,
and especially if you end up talking to someone who works there, and nobody works in those bookstores unless they unless they love books. I remember there's one in Woodstock, Vermont, or Woodstock, upstate New York, and I taught there at the photographic nonprofit up there, and I loved it. The guy who was behind the bar, behind the whatever it's called, behind the desk, he said he wouldn't let me. He was like, that scene, Jack Black in High Fidelity. He wouldn't let me buy certain novels. He was like, you must read this, and I just loved that. And I came home with a huge stack, and I that's where I read. He recommended Tinkers to me, and it was just an extraordinary novel. So it's not just photo books I feel this way about. It's all books,
Well, when I was in Maine, oh God, so many years ago, I can't stand to think about it, but back when it was called the Maine Photographic Workshop, Craig Stevens, I believe, recommended that I get Charles Harbett's travel log, and I picked that up at the store, and it has been one of my most enduring books. I see Ashley clapping for that. Yeah, it's. I mean, and certain books become stories in your life.
Yeah, and we gravitate to certain books at different times. I mean, Craig is such a great teacher and a great mentor of mine, of Ashley's, of many of us here. And, when someone puts a book in your hand and like firmly plants it in your hands, like it's like giving you a shake on the shoulders, I mean, I pay attention.
Right. And when they base that on a certain awareness of your work, and they say, oh, you shouldn't just see, but you should read, you should pick this up, you should acquire this book by Charles Harbett. I mean, it made a huge difference to me that someone was seeing me and seeing my interest in photography reflected in another photographer. I mean, it's not so much that you're being told, oh, Charles Harbett did this before you, so you can't, you shouldn't be thinking about doing this. No, it's part of a creative inspiration process.
Yeah, absolutely. And you feel seen and understood, right? Because I think so much of the time we're making work and it's just coming out of us. It's this intuitive process. So to find your people, to find, that you feel, that you're understood somehow, seen, as you said, I think that's a, wonderful thing. And then someone just said, Craig Stevens did that to me with Blue Violet. Well, what an honor. That's so nice. Thank you, Mara, for sharing that. Someone's asking if I'm doing a second printing of the new book. Was that because it sold out so quickly? Yeah, it is. I mean, I haven't done second printings of my other books. I think there's kind of something beautiful when it sells out, it's gone, but it went so quickly that, I feel really honored and really humbled and grateful. But I felt like that, there was a, people wanted it, they didn't get it, and then then it gets into stupid prices for books, which isn't the point, right? Books should be, whatever, they're $40, $50, they shouldn't be $600. I think that's, trade books. So I felt it was important to just get a few more out there, and then it will be done.
Are you a fan of little free libraries?
Oh, totally. I don't have the same touch thing as you. I like touching people's things. But I do, I always stop and see, stop if I see a little free library. There's loads around here. It's a very main thing.
I've started circulating certain photo books through little free libraries. It's sort of a seeding project that I like to do. And I stamp them. I stamp them in a way that it uses the motto of little free libraries, always a gift, never for sale. And I have a stamp that I put in there saying, this came from a free library, and you should not be putting this, don't try to sell this, because any reputable bookseller, shouldn't be selling a little free library book. Right.
I love that. That's beautiful. Good for you. You're doing the good work, George. I love it. True book.
Circulating, keeping things circulating.
Yeah, exactly. I hate that they get, that things get so expensive or you miss out on a book. And I've done it plenty of times too, where I just waited and then I didn't get, didn't get it. So, yeah. Anyhow.
I'm seeing in this work, like there's a shift that gets picked up in Blue Violet, a shift between different kinds of pages and mixing up typefaces and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm just sort of trying to create, this was Deb who designed with the / marks and the, mixing up. So that, I really recommend, even though I teach bookbinding and I can make books, and I do think working, photography is such a sort of singular process, sort of you're on your own, that working in a collaboration with a designer, someone, particularly a book designer, it can be a really rewarding and beautiful experience. Yeah.
This book is not one that I saw in person, so I've enjoyed seeing these spreads kind of get myself into it.
Yeah, I'll send you ones. Yeah. Matthias is asking if your work has always struck me as dealing with lovely, unabashed appreciation of beauty, where it feels like the type of relationship with beauty as subject matter is often disparaged in academia and the fine art world. I was wondering if you'd be willing to talk about some of your struggles you've had in terms of getting your work appreciated in those spaces. I think it's a great question. It's a difficult one. I mean, like Donna McNeil and I talked about beauty, and it brings out, people get really cross about beauty, and it's so interesting. Whereas I'm like, you know what? I want more of it in the world.
Bring it on.
Bring it on. I want more of it. I want like more flowers, more trees, more blue skies, more taste. I'm not saying I want expensive things. I want things that are, it's not beauty in terms of commodification of objects or material things. It's like love and friendship and, like delicious poached egg on toast in the morning, and just like savoring and living. And I think that I try not to get too involved in, some people are going to love your work, some people are going to hate your work, and that's the way it's always going to be. And I think my job is to sort of pay less attention to that and just make work, and I do think if it's just pretty for pretty's sake, then that's not, that's a postcard. I don't want to make that stuff, but I want to make work that is about sort of the real world, and the real world can be shockingly beautiful sometimes, and relationships can be shockingly beautiful. They can also be so fragile and painful, and out of great pain comes beauty, and vice versa often. So I think dealing with the dualities is really important. I'm certainly not sort of promoting like a postcard aesthetic. That's not my intention. But use of color to sort of seduce people, to convince people, absolutely, that's something that I'm interested in doing.
Yeah, this image in particular I just find so ravishing, enrapturing, and in part because of the vision thing, the sealing of the bird of prey, and
taking away the vision, and of the Emily who's in this picture, her eyes are covered too, and so it becomes like in it, it's all, I think of my work as being really very much about sort of we talked about Mara Kalman earlier, right? This idea of appreciating what is in the everyday and what is ordinary.
Right.
And there's that beautiful, beautiful paragraph in Ocean Vuong's On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, where he's talking about his grandmother, recognizing beauty in the world and wanting the flowers on the other side of the metal fence. And, I think it's that moment of, we do, beauty isn't necessarily a privileged space. It can be access to all. It can be, not always, but it can be.
I think Penn must have seen this spread and said, "Oh my goodness, this woman is an essayist, a prose stylist." I mean, I think this is just a wonderful hybrid of, almost inseparable text and image.
Yeah, this one does work together. Thank you. I mean, it was written 2 years apart, and I rarely write to an image or vice versa, but what I'm doing each day with the camera and each day with a pen is trying to say, okay, what did I see today that made me stop? Or what did I see today that I want to remember? And that's not because I walk around with a picnic basket and I don't have shitty days and all of that stuff. Of course I do, but I'm choosing to live in a way where I'm going to try and remember, even though somebody died today or whatever, that I love deeply, I'm going to try and remember something beautiful about this day as well. So, you know, it's almost like this manifesto on a way of living. And I think that that's what the text and images both do. They're like these sort of note taking, like I saw this, even though the news today made me, you know, like fall down on the ground. It was so disgusting and heartbreaking. I also saw this today, you know, and I think that makes sense as a way of living.
I love the fact that someone, particular reader, looked at this and said, oh, this poem is about a deer stand.
Oh, really?
And hunting, you know, they saw that first line, the deer stand. And a deer stand, for those who don't know, is a place where you go and wait for deer and you shoot them.
Yeah, no, I definitely didn't mean that. I've never shot a deer or thought about shooting a deer in my life. No, they were just standing under the tree. Sorry.
Right. No, but the frozen apple, I think, is just an incredible image.
Yeah, I wanted it to feel like the deer, in spite of, you know, having no body fat free, was still being decadent. This idea. Someone's asking me if I photograph every day. You know, I don't photograph every day, but I do something. I might, you know, when I'm on my flow, I'm photographing a lot. I have a little camera with me. I take it everywhere. You know, it's always, that's why they break them quite a lot. You know, like it's a note taker for what I saw that day. Sometimes I'll go back with an idea to expand that note taking further. You know, but other times, you know, I might just write. I try and do something creative that pushes my work further each day. Otherwise, you end up doing all the sort of side of things like, you know, emails and framing and, you know, all the stuff that actually, you know, they're the outward sort of part of being a photographer, not the inward. The inward is like the delicious stuff. It's the making of the work, you know?
Yeah, I find myself during my day every now and then just like, I need to do something that has nothing to do with my screen right now.
Yeah, particularly after COVID. I mean, you're heavy in your project with, you know, about your father, and, you know, it's important, I think, you know, a lot can get made if you do something a little bit every day, you know, not that, you know, some people do a rigorous with posting every day or making something every day. I'm not as good as that, but I really do try and push it forward, definitely every week, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
You've been really good about reading the chat for questions. That's something that's multitasking that I am never able to do. We're looking though at the last, you know, at a point now where people could unmute themselves if they'd like and chime in and ask questions, and we'll look through the chat. I'll try and look through the chat so Cig can talk.
So I think, you know, someone's asking me to explain this image. So this is an example of a mind map where I'm writing everything I can think of to do with flowers. So, you know, and then I watercolored it because I'm like a nerd in the winter, you know. So it's flowers. So that's the overall arching sort of metaphor. The blue violet is not about flowers. It's about living and dying. The flowers are just a metaphor. Okay. I'm not interested in just making pictures of flowers for flowers' sake. You know, so then I was like, okay, let me put down everything I can think of that has to do with flowers as a place to sort of become as an ideas board, you know. So I looked into the Victorian language of flowers, which, you know, I'll never forget you, my best days are past. Let me read some of these. I can't live without you. Please forgive me. I'll remember always. So these are sort of from Victoria, or how we use flowers in our society. And then I've got things like knotweed, Queen Anne's lace, so noun, so watering can.
I see the filmmaker Derek Jarman in there. What's the reference there?
Well, I mean, oh my God. So Derek Jarman was like my biggest influence. When I was 16, I bought Chroma, which is his book that he wrote when he was dying of AIDS. About his garden. So, you know, again, this idea, so Matthias, I would come back to you, you know, to say that, well, actually there's a precedence for very serious artists being drawn to color and nature and beauty when they're dying, you know, like what is important when you're dying. It's probably, you know, it's not necessarily sort of highbrow academia. It's like this satiated, what the body needs is beauty, and it needs color, and it needs to be surrounded by hope, and this act of sort of growing flowers being this sort of radical statement in many ways, you know. So, you know, so Derek Jarman was, you know, one of my earliest influences. I still have that same book highlighted, written in, maybe I was even 14, 15. It's a book that has stayed with me always. And I didn't understand how it related to where I am now until probably 5 years ago. But I've lived in probably 6 or 7, maybe 5 or 6 different countries in the last, I mean, I was on a visa for 30 years. So that book has traveled with me, you know, I mean, it has stayed, it's been an important book. So that's why he's on there, because of his commitment. So what he did when he was diagnosed with AIDS, and towards the end of his life, he moved to a nuclear, a really arid plot of land that looked over a disgusting nuclear site, and he made it beautiful. He planted in this soil that was like brutal, and he made this garden. You can still go and visit it today, that was full of beauty in front of a place that had none. And that was his sort of metaphor to live. I mean, he's just wonderful. Yeah. Anyway, so sorry, I digress. I could talk about him for hours, but just everything, nouns, verbs, adjectives, anything I can think of comes into these mind maps, and then it becomes this sort of, you know, this is one from one before, and I carry it with me. And when I take a moment, when Scout's late or whatever, and I'm waiting for her, I can carry my projects with me always. And
what's your theme on that one?
This was from Gardening at Night. I just pulled it out earlier to show you guys that they're physical objects. They don't exist on the screen, you know, other than for this. They are, you know, I carry them. And so when I was putting together the drawings for Blue Violet, I felt like it was essential that I had a mind map in there, because this is the way I've worked for 20 something years.
Right. And that's what I find so lovely about the book, is that it is willing to explore so many different streams of information and types of creativity. And, you know, I mean, it's a smorgasbord of creative energy, and you know, and so that's, I don't know, I'm sorry, I'm lost in those wordless places of admiration. You know, when you're just stuck admiring something and you lose words.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that, George. I know that, you know, when you reviewed my first book, you know, when was that, 10, 12 years ago, whatever, and you weren't sure. And so when you reviewed Blue Violet, I was like, oh my God, what's he going to say? Because I think you said in Emergency that you thought I was a little sort of off the rails or something like that. I don't know, you had a great time. It wasn't mean, but it was definitely, but the fact that you then, you know, went on and reviewed Blue Violet all those years later and you loved it, it meant the world to me. So I really appreciate it.
Yes, you've transformed me. Thank you.
Yeah.
So people should feel free to chime in, take yourself off mute.
Totally.
It's always hard to be the first person.
I know, it's true. It's true.
Yeah, Peter here. You know, I was looking through your work yesterday, and some of your images clearly seem like a story within the larger story, like something distinctly is happening. And then some of them are maybe more supportive images, but almost like film stills, I guess. But if is that how you're approaching some of those images? Like we're sort of looking on a specific scene that's happening as part of a larger or a separate story within your larger story within the book?
Yeah, I think so. And thanks, Peter. I also feel like some of the images are supporting too. You know, that they, especially in book spreads, it can be tough to have, you know, two pictures that are saying a lot in terms of narratively next to each other. They can be in conflict in that sense. So there are definitely pictures in the book that wouldn't necessarily make the gallery wall, but are really important to the book format.
That's so important too, to realize that pictures on the wall are so different from pictures in the book that, a picture you might not look twice at develops huge significance within the pages.
Yeah. Yeah, in terms of sequence, and they can be just as, I would say they're just as important as the one that sort of has a more decisive narrative. I think they can shape that narrative in terms of like tone and language. And they're often the quieter images, and sometimes become my favorites,
Right. Well, I think the image of Scout on the right side of this pairing, is a great example.
Exactly. I wasn't looking at the screen, but you're exactly right. This is a complete, this is exactly what I'm doing, that the image on the left is not a standalone image, but in concert with the one on the right, which is, it works as a standalone image, that they become something more, just we were talking earlier, this idea of 1 + 1 is more than 2, that they hopefully the potential that they become something more together in their collaboration.
Right, and also the dissolve from one spread to the next. This is not just Scout and the sky. This is Scout and the sky, and then what transforms as you turn the page. What that melds into.
We could spend a day talking about just sequencing, right? Absolutely, right. And also, trying to avoid not only sequencing by color, by tone, which is a sort of, I think I do that quite a lot, but I try and refrain, because sometimes that can be too easy. Whereas I love the page before the spread we just showed, because it's like two opposites also showing, right?
Other questions? Feel free.
I have another question. This image right here, it was just fantastic. And I'm just curious how you came about making this. How much time did it actually take to put together this image?
See, it's so interesting. So Peter, I love that, because a lot of my images are constructed, but a lot are found. People think of me as a constructor, but this is a found image. I found this. This is a compost heap. I didn't construct anything, so really it feels sort of like, that I'm not the maker of this. I just happen to be there, but that's what I love about photography, that sometimes it can take me 5 years to make an image, and I'll go back and revisit a spot, and it'll haunt me, and the picture sucks, and I have to go back again, and and it becomes this sort of labor in the making, which I don't mind, that's part of my job. But other times, if you have a camera with you always, you can respond to the world, and that, and you can find pictures. Not many artists have that option, with painters, they can't do that. With writers, they don't just find their, subject. So, or their words on the page, it's different. But point being is, this is a found image, and I could have constructed it, I suppose, but it would have felt really excessive to construct this, and wrong. My mark on the world is sort of a light footprint. But, and one thing I wanted to say about constructing images versus find, if I only construct my world and the book and the ideas, the project gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And whereas if I find images too, my world gets bigger, and the books get bigger, and the ideas get bigger, and the project. So I really try and do both simultaneously. I'm much better at constructing than I am finding. If we went through the whole book and said, gave it a construction or a found, I've got more constructions, probably less, although that's probably changing slightly, the relationship, the ratio. But it's really important for me to have a camera on me, and be there in the world, looking present, trying to see what it would look like as a picture.
Yep. Rick Schatzberg had a very, very apropos observation, finding an image like this as a gift.
Totally.
And then he quotes Friedlander, who said photography can be a very generous medium.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. What's the Cartier-Bresson that says, that extraordinary thing where photography is a machine gun, photography is a notebook, a photography is, it can be a song, all of these things, and photography is a gift. The fact that, but if you don't go out with your camera and you just sit on your ass watching telly, you're not going to find that gift. So it's such a reminder to me to get out there in the world and go see. You can't think up your pictures, and that's something I always tell my students. You've got to get out there. You got to go and see what you can find.
What's the best camera?
The one you have. You know, it's so true though. I mean, people are like, there's nothing wrong. I mean, iPhones are amazing now. Do it. Like if it's some big hulking great thing that you're never going to take with you, then it's useless, you know?
Well,
so
you got this thing in your pocket. I
Totally.
mean, it's not just a phone, it's a camera.
right,
I think people say, oh, it's just a camera, but it also has a phone in it.
right. Exactly.
Both astonishing.
Yeah. So
So
true.
I'll ask a question. As you're working with your daughter, as she gets older, do you is she becoming more of a collaborator? Like, does she suggest images to make, or what's her role become in the process, especially as she's getting older?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. It's like, so a couple of things there. So she is actually, I take pictures probably less than most people take pictures of their kids. I try and save it for special occasions, you know, so I'm not someone who's constantly, you know, taking iPhone pictures of her or whatever. When we take pictures together, it's sort of this more special moment or whatever. And I only do it when she's up for it or when it's her idea, she wants to do something. You know, I try and keep it that way because I don't want to be that. I've got no interest in being, you know, a mum that's forcing her kid to be in a picture. So, you know, I think people think there are more pictures of Scout than there actually are. I think there's in Blue Violet, there's probably 7, you know, sometimes they're either my friends' kids or strangers' kids or, you know, so I try and keep with Scout, you know, especially as she gets older, you know, this is her sort of privacy too. But I always come back to this idea is every picture that has Scout in, I think put all of them that I can think of, you know, it's trying to tell people that the world is wonderful and that the world has hope in it and the world is like to be explored. And so I feel that's a good message that she's seeing, you know, and feeling and being a part of. But yeah, it really varies. Like, you know, I photographed her quite a lot for orchestra. And that was, you know, that work came out of being in this car crash and it just felt like so precious. And so I studied her and actually I probably wrote about her more than I photographed her, just the way she saw the world. At that time, she was 5 and 6 and, you know, saw the world like it was all so magic. I mean, everything that came out of her mouth, what I thought was like hilarious or, you know, it's that age, right? Do you have kids?
No, I don't.
Yeah, so it was a way of seeing the world that was sort of reminded me that we should all live that way with trying to live with a sense of wonder. So it really depends on the project. I mean, during orchestra, I was definitely, you know, saw some press that, you know, this saw me as somewhat, you know, a mummy photographer. And I was like, you know, and then before that was a self-portrait and now I'm a flower photographer. And I'm like, oh, it doesn't, you know, the subject matter, right? It's more about what I'm trying to talk about is how to live, live a sensory life, how to like appreciate things. So those are just sort of the metaphors that I use to sort of get there.
I have a question, if I may. Hi.
Yeah,
I so loved, it was such a joyful way to share your imagery when you projected on the side of the building in Rockport.
yeah.
And, you know, we felt immersed and it was a theater of sorts, you know, public, and it was a wonderful thing. And I wonder too, if you're going to be doing any exploration with video and narration, your voice is wonderful, and how you're going to go beyond the book that then becomes again immersive in a sensory way that's different medium.
You know, Dawn, I would love to do, I mean, unfortunately, there's a hotel now being built in that slot. You know, you would think there'd be like endless walls that you can project on. It's actually very hard to find one because needs to be white. It needs to have no windows on it. It needs to have electricity right across from it at a certain height. I mean, it's actually, you know, I'm looking because that is something, you know, I'm just what Dawn is talking about. Last year, the week before the election just felt really fractured and troubled, and like there was so much anger in our community and in the country, and also the clocks went back, so it was getting dark at 3:59, and then COVID was on a surge, and I just felt like I had to do something. So I started projecting these riotous pictures of red and orange flowers and just like, or on 50 foot by whatever on this wall in Rockport. And I was supposed to do it for 3 days, and then I ended up doing it for 3.5 months every night. And I loved it. It was such a like this, you know, yes, people loved it, but I loved it too. It was not a selfless act, you know, it was a really beautiful experience. So in this like in the rain and the fog and the snow, to be projecting these images that cause surprise and delight and a sense of wonder. And, and I saw people, it brought joy. I mean, a woman who worked in the hospital would come every single night. She had these brutal shifts in COVID. She would come every single night and sit in her car and cry. And I would be down there every night. I would go down there because I didn't know about the timers. I didn't know that you could set a timer and it would go off. I would go and literally turn it on and then turn it off, 2 hours later or 3 hours later. Sierra would help me with Simone would help me with turning it off. So I like to go to bed really early, but every night I went down there. And so I would watch people respond to them. And it just felt like this small act of something I can do, that art can be an act of compassion, that it can help foster conversation, it can help repair. And these are all things that I'm really interested in. So while that space doesn't exist anymore, Dawn, I'm determined to find that is where I want to go next. You're absolutely right.
Well, thank you for that. It was meaningful, very meaningful.
I really enjoyed doing it. Yeah.
Cig, at one point in our in my exchanges going back and forth about this event, I referred to you as a sensualist.
Yeah.
And I think it's not an inappropriate term to use in regard to your practice and your person.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that is the senses are, it's like the very core of everything that I want to make, and make people feel more. I think that if we feel more, we'll be more compassionate to each other. And, it's and maybe that's idealized and maybe that's ridiculous, but you know what? It's not working the other way, is it? So I think trying different approaches that are perhaps more circular and less didactic and more, you're on that side and I'm on this side. Right. So that's what that's what I'm trying to do. So there's
well, yeah, it's 6:06 p.m. As we correctly assumed, our time together would fly.
Yeah.
Which it truly has. It has been such a pleasure for me to have the chance to talk to you and listen to you.
Yeah, and likewise, George. And I'm, so excited with your project with your father. Everyone should check out George's work too. Just a true, you've just been such a steadfast figure in photography for all these years, and I'm deeply grateful to you.
Well, thank you, Cig. And I'm glad my review of Emergency didn't frighten you off.
I opened it like this when I heard that you were doing it. I was like, oh no, but no, I was over the moon, and that made it even sweeter. The fact that there was like, it was, I felt like you were going to be critical of it in a good way. Like I want that.
Right. And I liked the book.
Yes.
Just for your information.
Yeah, it was a good review.
And I just want to mention to everyone that there is an opportunity to issue some spontaneous generosity through Venmo. It's George-Slade-2. And for next month, we will have Sean Records joining us from the Pacific Northwest. It'll be at 6 p.m. Central, and it's on Tuesday, September 14th, 6 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Pacific. And as Sean likes to say, 4 p.m., that's between coffee and beer. So
I like him a lot.
Yes. So please join us in September on Tuesday, the 14th. Cig, thank you again. Blessings to you and best wishes to Maine. And we'll see everyone next month, I hope.
Yeah, great. Thanks for your time, everyone. I appreciate it. Bye, guys.
Thanks,
Bye,
Jennifer.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Julia. Bye, everyone. This is the awkward part where you'll stare.
Yeah. So we're just saying, Cig, hi. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone. I'm going to leave. Bye, George.
All right. Bye. Take it easy, Cig.